Hi, this is Francie in Chicago, and I'm a big fan of Sean Casten, and you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Check them out on Twitter at Two Broads Talk.
Are you listening?
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and tonight I'm here with Sean Casten, who is running for Congress in the Illinois 6th District. Hi, Sean.
Hey, Kelly, how are you?
I'm great, and I'm really excited to talk to you because this is the closest swing district to where I live. So I've been talking to people all over the country, but this is actually the closest one to me, so I'm pretty excited about it. Why don't we start with just a little bit of background? Who are you and what led you to this, and why are you running for Congress?
I think the short version is like a lot of people. I was motivated by Trump, although there's sort of accidents of timing and geography in one's life that conspire to make other things possible. I spent 7 years working as a biochemist, biochemical engineer, got really concerned about climate change. That led me to start up a couple companies that had missions to profitably reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and did that for 16 years and had a lot of fun with that, would have still been doing it, but for a variety of reasons that were not all up in my control, we sold our company in September of 16, and then Trump happened. And I suddenly found myself living in a district that went fairly solidly for Hillary Clinton, represented by someone who is, I think the political term is full-on Tea Party crazy. and I couldn't quite figure out how are those two things compatible. And I've done a fair amount of policy work, but I've never done political work. And there's a whole set of interesting things that cause that to become possible. But the short answer to your story is that I had a number of people who I respected along the way who taught me why that was possible and suggested that the way to fix it is to have someone like me running to stop it. And so here I find myself, and so far they've all been proven right.
All right. And let's talk a little bit about the Illinois 6th District. I spend a lot of time looking at different districts, and the median income, at least in the Illinois 6th, is a lot higher than in a lot of parts of the country that I look at. It's a district that's fairly close to the city of Chicago. As you noted, it went to Hillary Clinton fairly strongly, and yet has a Republican representing it. So can you talk a little bit about the district, what it looks like, and, if you have some insight into why there's that discrepancy between the presidential vote and the congressional vote?
So the district itself, I think, can be best thought of as a district that was reliably Republican in 1995. It's more affluent than your typical district. It's more educated than your typical district. It's whiter than your typical district. And it's the type of place that is socially conservative, kind of pro-market, pro things that used to be thought of as sort of center-right values, but is very hostile to Trump because Trump ain't that. Mm-hmm. My own personal theory is that 2016 was the last election that you could run as a down-ballot Republican and not be asked whether or not you were a Trumpy Republican. Mm-hmm. And so it's historically, elected people who didn't have huge name ID but had an R after their name. And it went so strongly for Hillary because it's not a district that has those kind of values, the Trump values, it is.
I remember, in fact, shortly before the 2016 election, driving through Chicago suburbs and seeing zero Trump signs. there would still be signs for other Republicans, but nobody was putting up Trump signs. And I sensed then that there was sort of a discrepancy there.
Yeah, without question. And frankly, you can see it. That my opponent has voted. So the two statistics that I think are worth knowing about this district: there are only 5 districts in the country that went more strongly for Hillary and elected a Republican, and there are only 9 representatives of Congress who have voted more consistently with Trump. Mm. So when I describe my opponent as full-on Tea Party crazy, that's actually a mathematically precise term. That's not just being pejorative. But he is absolutely not running on his voting record. He's running on trying to portray himself as a centrist who is bipartisan, who is concerned about the environment, which is basically me. And so it's encouraging, but it's not a place where you can run on a pro-Trump record, which I frankly find kind of reassuring because I don't have to pretend to be anybody else than myself.
So when I think of your opponent, the words that come to mind are tax scam.
Mm-hmm.
So he was involved in some way in the recent tax legislation.
Yes.
That we're all calling the tax scam. Is that something that is popular or unpopular or mixed in your district?
Hugely unpopular, and he bills himself as the architect of the tax bill. I'm happy to let him take that credit. And I'm not sure how much role he played in that as opposed to the lobbyists, but I'm happy to bill him that way. The district, and it's a peculiarity of certainly of this district, and I think it's probably true of others. It is wealthy enough that if folks here have an extra $1,000 or so in their wallet, it doesn't have a huge impact on their lifestyle. But it's not so wealthy that people aren't really concerned about having an economy that's going to make sure that their kids who are looking at college bills or who are living in their basement or their parents who are moving to fixed income are going to have the wealth to get them through. And so the tax bill has become a hugely negative feature in the district because the small economic impact, positive or negative, is trivial, but $2 trillion of deficits and threats to cut Social Security and Medicare and do nothing about education affordability is really scary to a lot of folks in the district. And he's chosen to hitch his wagon to that. And on top of that, this is the 12th highest state and local property tax of all the congressional districts in the country. And Roscoe actually initially voted to completely get rid of the state and property tax. And, Susan Collins insisted on putting it back in the Senate. But generally, the more Republican the towns are in the district, the higher their state and local taxes. So Hinsdale, which is in the district, has an average state and local property tax of $43,000. Those people are really unhappy about a $10,000 cap. And they historically have been pretty Republican. And now they're sitting there saying, you kind of sold me down the river.
So as you're going around and talking to individual people around the district, are you seeing this sort of thing reflected? Are they indicating, are there people who have historically voted Republican in congressional elections that are indicating that, in fact, they may very well vote Democratic this time?
Overwhelmingly, yes. One of the sort of deepest pieces of wisdom I got was a guy who was at an event I was at a couple months ago who said, I finally feel like you're talking to the phantoms. And I said, what's a phantom? And he said, I'm a phantom because everybody treats me as if I'm invisible. And as he clarified, he said, he said something that I feel sort of myself as well. But he said, the Republican Party has not spoken for me in 15 years. And you're the first person in the Democratic Party to speak to me. And so I think there's no question but that the demographics and the values of the district are moving slightly to the left, but the Republican Party is sprinting to the right. And so you've got all these people whose values haven't really changed, but are no longer finding people within the Republican Party who share those values. This has always been kind of a 55-45 Republican district. In the primary, the ballots polled went 55-45 the other way, and about 15% of the ballots polled were from people who had previously polled a Republican ballot. So, the blue wave is definitely a thing, but a lot of that energy, at least in this district, is being driven by people who historically voted Republicans but are voted with the Republican Party but are now just fed up and saying, my values are closer to the Democrats nowadays.
And so let's talk about some of the issues and values that are ones that are sort of driving your campaign. So I assume that environmental issues, climate policy are important to you. And so I'm wondering what sorts of things you would like to see Congress doing, what sorts of things you would like to see. I mean, it would be nice if the EPA did anything positive, but what sorts of things we could and should be doing about climate change that is not being done right now? Sure.
So let me just start by making an observation which is going to, I'm almost reluctant to say it because it sounds naive, but there are things, and I'm learning this. I mean, I'm a first-time candidate, so, take this with a grain of salt. But I'm finding that there are things which are considered exceptional in the political realm that are considered the bare minimum standard of performance in all other realms. And so making decisions based on the facts in front of you rather than what's politically expedient is somehow considered heroic in politics. And there is nothing that is deserving of a cookie for doing that. Right? And we all do that in our normal life. And then also making decisions where we say, I've got two competing interests. Can I find a win-win? That's not considered exceptional in normal life, but is considered heroic in politics. And so I mention that on the environment because my whole thing with the businesses that I set up and ran was that carbon dioxide is this totally unique pollutant. Number one, it is massively scary for what is happening to our planet, and we're not doing enough to address it. But number two, it is the only pollutant where lowering the reduction of that pollution saves money every single time. That's because you can't release CO2 without burning fossil fuel, and nobody gives away fossil fuel for free. That's totally different from soot, from acid rain pollutants, from carbon monoxide. All those require you to invest in things that are expensive to control. CO2, you save money by reducing. And so in a business context, we sort of took that insight to say, let's go out, let's lower CO2 emissions by lowering people's cost of energy and clean up the air while making energy cheaper and creating jobs and building new infrastructure. We built about 80 projects, a couple $100 million, and we ran into a ton of policy barriers to doing more of that because so much of the policy framework is framed around zero sum rather than win-win solutions and making decisions that are politically expedient but factually incompetent. And so, there's a whole bunch of things that I could go into, ranging from inadvertent accidents of the Clean Air Act to some weird algebraic formulations. But they're very fixable problems. But in order to fix them, you have to start by saying, let's make decisions based on facts and look for the win-win first.
I guess that maybe leads into something that I've been thinking about, and that is this sort of whole push among Republicans to talk a lot about deregulation and to have made sort of regulation into a dirty word almost. And the way that obviously they're trying to speak to businesses when they do this, but I have trouble understanding why people who are not businesses, who are not big businesses, are for deregulation. But I confess I have never either worked in politics or in business. So I guess I'm wondering sort of, is there a way that the government can do sort of the correct amount of regulating to help people, to make people's lives better, but to not get in the way of business and innovation? So I'm wondering if you can sort of, that's a vague question, but if you can sort of talk about that challenge.
So I think, and I should clarify from my prior comment that I actually think that government has a really critical role, and I certainly don't mean to suggest that government regulation is the problem with our environmental rules. But one of the lessons I learned from running some clean energy advocacy organizations on the Hill, we used to joke that the one constituency that never lobbies Washington is a constituency for economic efficiency, because truly competitive markets are really, really hard. If you pull out your old freshman economics textbook and what are the conditions where all those magical things of market economies work, it means that you've got your competitors are just as strong as you are, and people have perfect information, and so they know everything about your cost structure, and there's no barriers to entry or exit. And those businesses are terrible to be in. They're really hard. The consumer benefits, but they're hard places. And so, really letting markets work, I think from a regulatory framework, requires a certain balance between, on the one hand, saying, let's make sure that we meet the public interest and consumer protection, which means, injecting a lot of competition, while at the same time recognizing that the business community really doesn't want competition. And that's not a bad thing, right? So, when I ran my business, we signed up people to have 20-year energy contracts. And if we didn't have 20-year energy contracts with them, it would have been very hard for us to invest the capital that we might not get paid off for 5 or 6 years. But that basically meant I was precluding them from fully participating in it.